Hi everyone, I'm back with another video, and I promise you today we will actually talk about embryology. I know I took the last two videos to talk about genetics, and I kept saying, I kept hyping it up that we were going to talk about embryology. Well, today is that day. We are going to talk about embryology today. But first, I do want to clarify something that I hear from a lot of people, and I'm not sure where this misconception started or what people think that they have to gain by saying this. But I hear a lot that when you're a fetus, everybody starts off female, and then somewhere down the line, something is added to where you differentiate and become an anatomical male, if that's what you're going to do. But that's not actually the case at all. In fact, we all start off from what we call the indifferent stage. And so this is where you are neither an anatomical male nor an anatomical female. You may have some aspects of both, some aspects of neither, and that is just usually what happens. So I know I just crushed your dreams in saying that we all don't start off as female. Where it's some kind of a Schrodinger's cat type situation where we are neither male nor female. And we'll find out eventually. But something that we all were at one point is that we were all, at one time in our lives, a shelf. And yes, I did say that right. We were all shelves. And so we all started off, this is going to happen around between 5 and 7 weeks gestation. And by this point, our genetics have already been figured out during fertilization. The whole X versus Y chromosome thing, SRY gene, has all been figured out, and we're going to figure out later on what consequences those have on our development. But today, this is all pretty neutral ground here. But we are all going to start off as shelves. So I'm going to draw these. Yes, these are supposed to be shelves. I'm sorry. I hope you get the point. I'm not an artist, but I hope you can kind of see where I'm getting at with these. And so these are shelves, and these are called the urogenital ridge. And it's called the urogenital ridge because the urinary system, so the kidneys, the bladder, the ureters, they all stem from a similar development process as the gonads. And in fact, in medicine, we call this system the genitourinary system because anatomically and physiologically, these two have so much overlap. And even in embryology, these develop from very similar places, and they overlap to where they connect to one another, and you'll see in adulthood that you have similar pathologies that can be associated with both systems. We're not going to focus a lot on the urinary system and the kidneys, but I just did want to point out that this ridge, this little shelf, does develop into both the urinary and the genital systems. So you would see the kidneys developing over here and over here, but we're not going to worry about those today. That's not super important. But the medial part, the middle part of the urogenital ridge, we have the gonadal ridge. And sitting in the gonadal ridge it's not a testis, it's not an ovary, it is neither. This is a primitive gonad. So it has no features of being male, no features of being female. It just is what it is. It is a primitive gonad. So this all is taking place up around the bottom of your thoracic area. So where your kidneys are, if you can feel where your kidneys are, this is where all it's going to take place. Your gonads do start to develop up around your kidneys, and then they will have germ cells that will migrate down this area and then become the rest of this system. So we have our primitive gonad, and eventually the cells are going to migrate, and they're not going to become this area. This area develops in a different fashion. But down here we have the urogenital sinus. And I'll go into more detail later about what these structures are going to develop into. The urogenital sinus is going to become more of the lower urinary tract, and so that includes the bladder and other structures. I'll get into that later. But the important thing is that these primitive gonads are going to need to find a way to connect with this urogenital sinus. And so we're going to develop two different structures at this stage. And the first structure to connect these, I'm going to use green here, is called the mesonephric duct. And so the mesonephric duct is going to start from a primitive gonad, and it's going to make a little tube all the way down to the urogenital sinus. Same thing over here. We're going to have two of these, and these are going to attach independently at the urogenital sinus. And so let me just give a little thing here that this is the mesonephric duct. And if you studied anatomy earlier on in educational years, you may have heard this as the Wolffian duct. That's the exact same term. Wolffian duct and mesonephric duct are the same thing. The more common terminology nowadays is to call it the mesonephric duct. So that is the language that I'm going to use in these videos. So we have the mesonephric duct, and then next to the mesonephric duct, which, I mean, this kind of makes sense considering the verbiage, is the paramesonephric duct. And para just means that is next to, and as this sits next to the mesonephric duct, it makes sense that this would be called the paramesonephric duct. And these paramesonephric ducts are going to join up before they reach the urogenital sinus and then attach at one place. So this is the paramesonephric duct. And so this is kind of our indifferent stage anatomy that we have going on here. You'll see this at 7 weeks gestation, after which you're going to start seeing some development occur towards either male or female, neither or both. But something I do want to point out here that is a difference in sexual development that can occur at this stage is the fact that these primitive gonads have to have cells that migrate in order to form the mesonephric duct and the paramesonephric duct. But sometimes you might have cells that don't migrate along this path at all. And that is something that we call gonadal agenesis. And agenesis means that it just doesn't develop. And so if you have, for some reason, either why this primitive gonad won't form or why the cells won't migrate down to the urogenital sinus to form the mesonephric duct and the paramesonephric duct, then you just might not have gonads develop at all. And this is a totally reasonable situation. And when I talk about these differences in sexual development, I do want to mention that language is very important in how we talk about these types of things. So I'm choosing to use the terms differences in sexual development because I know a lot of people like to say disorders of sexual development, and I just don't like to use that term. Humans are different. Everybody is different from each other. And to say that something is normal or abnormal just kind of dehumanizes people. And I really don't want to do any of that here. Like, I have blue eyes, and blue eyes aren't a normal trait. Blue eyes are a mutation. But you're not going to look at someone with blue eyes and say, oh, you're not normal. You must have a pathology or you must be sick for having blue eyes. Like, it's just something different that my body has that other people might not. And that's the same thing with developmental biology. If someone does not have gonads that develop or don't have these ducts that form, that doesn't mean that their life is going to be any different than the rest of us. They are people. And I don't want to use language that's going to make someone feel that they are less human or that their experience is anything less than normal. So I'm not going to use those kind of terms. We're just going to stick with differences in sexual development because everybody has differences, and differences are normal. Differences are what make people unique and special. So with that little rant out of the way, I'm going to delete this image, and we're going to focus on kind of what the external anatomy is going to look like in this indifferent stage, because not only do you have your gonads beginning to develop at this stage, you do have external anatomy beginning to form. Granted, this external anatomy isn't going to be clearly identifiable as male or female. It's going to be somewhere in between the two. And so I'm going to make another little sketch here. So by week 7 of gestation, this is what is going to be appearing. So imagine you were looking straight up at somebody. I know that sounds kind of awkward, but this is how we are going to look at it. So we have I know my drawing is absolutely terrible, but we have some structures beginning to develop. And so if you were to see this on somebody's anatomy, I mean, sure, you can see some aspects of where someone might say that this is female anatomy or where someone might say that this is male anatomy, but it doesn't really look like either, and it isn't. It is totally indifferent, and these structures are going to develop in different ways depending on hormone influences, environmental influences, and even the SRY gene and the XY presentations that we saw in the previous videos. But this structure right here, the first one I'm going to draw your attention to, this is called the genital tubercle. And then this right here, this hole is this is the urogenital sinus. And then this outside part here, this fold, is what we call either the urethral fold or the urogenital fold. And then this here is called the labio-scrotal swelling. And just like that says, this is going to develop into labia or the scrotum or somewhere in between, depending on environmental influences. And so now that you have kind of a picture of the indifferent anatomy that we have going on, I'm going to talk about the internal and external development and where these paths might be going in the future. And I'm not going to draw any pictures for this one. We're just going to rely on words, because I admit I'm not confident in my artistic ability to be able to draw all this out. So we're just going to talk a little bit about these structures. So the first one, I'm going to talk about the mesonephric duct. And eventually, the mesonephric duct is going to from the trigone, the ductus deferens, which also is known as the vas deferens, the epididymis. I always spell this word wrong. Epididymis, the ejaculatory duct, and the seminal vesicle, which is a gland involved in sexual activity. And then the paramesonephric, I'm just going to put para. The paramesonephric duct is going to develop into the uterus, the uterine tubes, also known as the fallopian tubes, the cervix, and the upper 2/3 of the vaginal canal. And then our urogenital sinus is going to develop into the bladder, the urethra, prostate, I cannot spell, bulbourethral glands, the lower 1/3 of the vagina, the glands associated with the urethra and the vestibular glands. So those two drawings that I showed you, the internal anatomy and the external anatomy, they both have things that are going to develop into many, many different structures. And so if you have a mesonephric duct, a paramesonephric duct, and a urogenital sinus, look at all of the ways that you can develop because of that. And some of these you may associate with male anatomy, and some of these you may associate with female anatomy, but depending on environmental exposure, these can become any number of these anatomical structures. And I'm going to show later on why you could have somebody who has a ductus deferens and who might also have a uterus. They might have a prostate and they might also have a uterus. These things are not mutually exclusive, and because someone might develop some aspects of what we would consider to be female anatomy does not mean that they aren't going to develop features of male anatomy. All right, now for the external genitalia and what these are going to develop into down the road, we have the genital tubercle, which is this piece right here. This is going to become the glands and bulb of both the penis and of the clitoris. And so the penis and the clitoris are what we call homologs. And so homologs are structures that originate from the same common origin, but then develop into different structures. So in this case, we have the genital tubercle, which is the same for everybody. This is the common origin, that then could either become the glands and bulb of the penis or the glands and bulb of the clitoris. And so the next one is the urogenital fold. So the urogenital fold is either going to develop into the penile urethra or the labia minora, or this could be somewhere in between the two. Some people may have both. The urogenital sinus, we established in the internal anatomy that this is also going to develop the bladder and such, the prostate, so I'm not going to go a whole lot back into that, but something that you do see down here in this area is the bulbourethral glands and the Bartholin glands. And then the labioscrotal swelling, also known as the genital swelling. Is going to become the scrotum or the labia majora. And so I want you to think of these not necessarily as totally separate structures that can develop, but I want you to think of this more as a spectrum. So like if we take the, it's a good example. Let's take the labioscrotal swelling. So we have on one side it might develop into the scrotum, it also might develop into the labia, but it could fall anywhere along the spectrum here. And that's the same thing with any of these structures. It is possible to have one very distinct organ on either end of the spectrum, but you could also have something in between. You could also have both structures can be common, or neither structure can also be common. And so with all of that being said, the next video we're going to go into talking about gonadogenesis, how a testis would form, how an ovary would form, and then seeing the spectrum with those as well. But again, even in, of course, this indifferent stage is supposed to tell you that there are points where there is a lack of difference between male and female, but this is the trajectory. This is where we're going to end up, is differentiating into multiple structures. And so once again, I don't think that biological sex is binary. Science doesn't say biological sex is binary. If you think I'm wrong, feel free to put comments down below. Tell me why I'm wrong. I might respond to you. I might not. We'll see. But if you think I'm wrong, feel free to tell me I'm wrong. But until next time, I will see you in the next video.